I had an amazing reading month in June. Let's chat about it. Hi, my name is Jeanette, and I want to thank you for joining me on the channel Jane Reads. So I'm going to tell you about the books that I read in June. But before we get into my June reading recap, let's do a little housekeeping. So the last video I posted was my July TBR game, where my BFF wreaked a little havoc on me, which, okay, fine. So, because of a couple of her choices, I couldn't read a book in June that I was planning on reading in June as like an additional read, which is fine. That's perfectly fine. And then she picked a book that I did not expect her to pick, so then I ended up with 6 books instead of 7 books on my TBR. That's awesome. But we are now at June the 28th, and I am filming this wrap up because not only is my BFF trying to mess up my reading life, my husband is messing up my filming life. So Andrew is on holidays next week, which means I don't have the filming time that I normally have when he goes to bed early to when he has to work, which is fine. But I'm like, okay, it's June 28th. The chances of me finishing another book before the end of the month, it's possible, except I do know that we also have a busy weekend. So I don't have as much reading time on Saturday and Sunday that I would normally have. So that only leaves like today and Friday and some of Saturday that I'll be able to read. So I'm like, okay, could I finish another book? Yes, I could. But then I'm also like, I have read 12 books this month. I have 9 of them physically, and 1 I borrowed from the library, and 2 are on my Kindle. So, okay, so I've already read 12 this month. So if I finish 1 more book, that means I'll read 13. And I don't like odd numbers. So, and I also need to get this filmed. Otherwise, I don't know when my reading wrap-up will get filmed otherwise. So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I will just start 2 books. And I'll work on 2 books for the next 4 days that are left of the month. And I won't finish them before the end of the month. So then they will count towards July's reading. Okay? Now, and this is unusual for me because I am usually 1 book at a time, especially if I can get that book on audio and to read it in either physically or on my Kindle. I like to go through 1 book, so it is a little bit unusual, but that's what I'm going to do. And I know what one of those books is going to be right now. I still need to decide on the second book because I will not start my July TBR before July. I will be good. Also because I'm going to be filming my vlog at the very beginning of the month, so I want to save a couple books for that vlog. So we'll see what I decide to start in the meantime. Maybe I'll read the hockey book that my BFF said I couldn't read because hockey's over. Except, sorry to say, Christine, but the team I've been cheering for since the beginning of this playoff season and that I cheered for last year is the team that won. So, yeah, I think I should be allowed to read a hockey book. So we'll see. Okay, now that the housekeeping's done, let's get into the 12 books that I have read and which ones I would recommend for you to give a try to if you have not already read them. So I've done something a little different this month. I've tried to sort them to rank them through rating and keep genres together. I think I've done a pretty good job of that. We'll see. Except that also means I'm not going in the order in my notebook, so it could be a little difficult for me, but we'll see. Okay, so let's start with the first book. Children of the Stars by Mario Escobar. So I read this one to fulfill the prompt for Katie's Read Around the World challenge was a translated book. So this one is being translated from Spanish to English. And I buddy read this with Alma from Alma's Book Journey Anne from In Search of Wonder, and 2 other ladies. I don't think they have YouTube channels. If I'm wrong, let me know because I will link you. And so it was really nice that we buddy read this because it kind of made me think a little bit more about some of the things that I hadn't really noticed when I was reading them. Wow, I cannot talk. While I was reading through it. So we are following 2 Jewish boys in 1940. Yes, 1942, Paris. And they have been sent to live with their aunt from their parents while their parents go off in search of a safe place. And so they leave the boys with the aunt. Well, the raids happen, and then very early on, they get separated from the aunt, and they are trying to find their parents. So they travel through France trying to connect with their parents. And it seems like every time they get a little bit closer, their parents get that much further away. And this was heart-wrenching because these boys are not very old. We're talking 9 and 13, I think the older boy was. And they encounter some really terrifying situations. But then they also encounter some really generous people and caring people that go out of their way, even though to help them, even though it could backfire on them, it could get them in trouble by helping the boys. I really appreciated that. There is some stuff in here that didn't seem to fit. A little bit of a political agenda maybe. Now some of that kind of just gloss over for me because you mentioned politics and I have no idea what's going on or talking about it, and I don't really notice it as much. But then there's a story that an older man is telling the oldest boy, and I'm like, why are you going into that much detail? Yeah. So this book was a 3 stars for me. I really enjoyed the writing style and following it. I had no issues following along. There were times that it did seem a little bit jumpy or choppy maybe, but I think that's because of the translation. Sometimes things just get lost in translation. So I did really enjoy this, and I would be tempted to try another book by this author because I've heard really good things. But the reason I struggled the most with this story is I just could not understand the parents or have any sympathy for the parents. And then the way it ends, it doesn't really resolve questions that I had for the parents. And it was just, I don't know. So that is The Children of the Stars by Mary Escobar. So this is historical fiction. Okay, then the next book I do not own physically. I borrowed this from the library, and that was 2 Reasons to Run by Colleen Coble. This is book 2 in the Pelican Harbor series, and we are following, what are the characters' names? Police Chief Jane Hardy and her son Will Dixon and his dad Reed Dixon. And so we know from book 1 that Jane hasn't known her son for 14 years, and they've just reconnected from the end of book 1. So this book 2 picks up right after book 1, immediately. And then there's another case that happens, and we spent a lot of time, well, maybe not a lot of time, but it's revolving around an oil rig in the ocean and possible terrorist attack, and then somebody goes missing and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Then Jane receives threats for her son Will, and so then they have to decide how to deal with that. We kind of watch Jane and Reed get a little bit closer because at the end of book 1 they were there was a lot of tension there. And so we watched them kind of work through some of that in this book. The story, the main case does conclude in this book, but you know that the personal relationships continue as per life, right? So I really enjoyed following kind of the personal relationships and seeing what's going on. The very beginning story, we meet, at the very beginning of the book, we meet the character that goes missing. And it's told from like his perspective at that time. And I was like, I was fully invested in that book. And then he goes missing and we have no, his perspective doesn't happen again, right? And it's like, oh, well, that sucked. Because I really connected with him very quickly. And I struggled more with Reed and Jane. But, so this was a 3-star read for me. I will read book number 3 because I want to know how the family relationship dynamic ends at the end. Okay, then the next book is Sundown by Susan May Warren. This is book 3 of the Sky King Ranch series, so I have completed a series. So this one is, we are following the third Kingston brother, Colt, who we met in book 2 and really got to know in book 2. So this picks up a story with continuing from book 1 and then in book 2. So in book 1, the two main characters find this missing lady and come across this missing lady who doesn't know who she is. By book 3, she has recovered her memory, knows who she is, and we're finding out more, so we're following her story. One thing about this, it starts in Alaska, but then it goes to Florida. So majority of the book takes place in Florida because Alaska is not my favorite setting. But there is a lot going on about Russian terrorism and trying to attack the world's happiest place. And they're in Florida. So you know where that is, right? So I'm just like, but then there's things that happen that just make me question the realistic value of it. So I didn't connect with the characters, and we're really, yes, it's Colt and the female character are kind of the main, but we spent a lot of time with Naomi and Ranger as well, who are the couple from book 2. And we kind of see more of their relationship, which I really enjoyed, having multiple perspectives. I did really enjoy that. But again, I gave this book 3 stars because I just didn't connect with the storylines as much as I wanted to. There is a lot of medical references in this, and the main female character is a medical biologist, scientist, something like that. She's trying to create a vaccine. So there's a lot of talk about vaccines and like just a lot of medical stuff, and that just took me out of the story. I just wasn't following it the same. So I gave this book 3 stars. Okay, then my classic. So I read Heidi by Joanna Spyri, I think is how you say the name. And so I read this and listened to the audiobook, and I loved it. I did not know anything about this story really, other than it was following a little girl named Heidi, and it took place in Switzerland. That is about my knowledge of the story going into this story. And Heidi is such a positive character, and she could have been a miserable character due to circumstances, but her positivity just radiates off the page, and she is so cute to follow. So she is 5. Yes, she is 5 when the story starts, and then we follow her through. I think she's probably about 9, 10 when the story ends. I think so. We're following quite a few years, and I loved the relationships and the setting, the description of what she was seeing, and yeah, this was such a sweet story. So I highly recommend giving this one a try. And I am so glad I have it in this hardcover edition. It's just so beautiful. So, okay. Then I read book 1 and book 2 of the Restoration series by Terri Blackstock. So book 1 is Last Light and book 2 is Nightlight. And this is the last book I just finished. So these are both 4 stars for me. We meet, at the very beginning, we meet Denny Branning and her father, Doug, who have just flown in to Birmingham, Alabama. They're returning home from Washington, where Danny has just finished school and is about to start her internship, but she's also planning a wedding, so she comes home to work on planning the wedding. Well, their plane lands, and seconds, like moments later, another plane comes in and crashes, and kind of the world just goes, well, the town, like the airport goes in chaos. As they go out of the airport, they find more chaos. And as the book progresses, they find out that it's just not their area of town. It's the city, it's the state, it's the country. Later, they find out it's the world. Everything is shut down. There is no power. Cars will not run. It's chaos. And I felt like I was experiencing the blackout that they were experiencing at times. Like, it was just so unsettling at times, because it was like, oh my gosh, because people just go crazy. And then, like, everybody's trying to ravage everybody for food. Like, so you've got bicycles for transportation, and people are stealing bikes from people. And now, like, guns are your protection. And yeah, just wow. But then so we're really following them as the main characters. Now we are following the whole Branning family, which consists of the mother, who is Kay, so Doug's wife, and then there's 3 other siblings. And we've got Jeff, who's 16, Beth, who's 10, 11, and then Logan, who's 8. And so we're following this family, trying to figure out how to deal with this and what the steps going forward. And Denny wants to get back to Washington, where her fiance is. So she starts doing some things that are pretty risky. And thankfully, her dad is able to come to her rescue and help her. And she kind of really learns. And we see the family trust in God. And especially Doug and Denny kind of really turn to God and trust him. So book 1 has its own kind of case that it's investigating, and as they're dealing with this, it is wrapped up in this one, but the blackout, world shutdown, it kind of keeps going. So then in book 2, we are now 3 months into the shutdown of everything. They've now called it the pulses that are affecting things, and people are starting to learn how to live with it, and like they're digging a well, and the community's coming together. And so then their house is robbed by some kids, and the things that are revealed in this one about those kids' situation, heartbreaking. The way that those kids were surviving the last 3 months, and kind of what they survived even before the blackout, heart-wrenching. And then there's its own little case they're trying to solve with these kids, and kind of the case just keeps building, and you think you know what happened, and then all of a sudden something else happens. Then we've also got the personal relationships going on, and now like what happens when Denny's fiance arrives in town. And just I wasn't a big fan of Denny in this book, but I really liked her in this book, and I really have an opinion of how I feel about her fiance, and kind of what I want her future to look like. And the way this book ends, just like, I liked the kind of the witnessing aspect of it, and I liked the choice that Denny makes at the end of it. So I gave both these books 4 stars, because I was fully invested in the story, but there were parts that I did not really like, or just seemed not unbelievable, but it's hard to describe. They just wasn't a 5-star read for me, but I really enjoyed it. And sometimes I felt kind of every time like it got stormy and the power was gonna go out, it was like, please don't. Like, please come back on. Because, yeah, it just felt very realistic in that way. So those are the 2 books. Okay, then the next one is Meet Me at the Starlight by Rachel Hauck. This is an advanced reader copy that I read through NetGalley. This releases on July the 2nd, so it's already out by the time you're seeing this video. And I talked about this book in my anticipated reads video, and I pretty much had no idea what this book was about. And as I started reading it, it was like, yeah, I really had no idea what this book was about. So it is a dual timeline story. We are following Tuesday night we meet her in 1932, I want to say. She is a mother to 2 young teenage, like kind of preteen boys. Her husband is on the road a lot due to his job. And then she kind of takes over the running of the roller rink, which is called the Starlight. Then the other timeline we're following is 1987, where we meet Harlow Hayes, who is a supermodel who's kind of gone behind the scenes, out of the public eye due to a breakup that happened, and she is learning to deal with it and working through her feelings of it. And then so she arrives in Florida where the Starlight is kind of just to kind of recoup from life and try to figure out her next step. Then we meet Matt Knight, who is the grandson of Tuesday, who is a Hollywood A-lister with a bad boy reputation. So he's really a good guy, known for his acting skills, but he kind of doesn't have the best reputation outside of acting. He comes to town to help his grandmother kind of save the Starlight roller rink. Due to what's happening with the town, they are threatening to tear down the roller rink. And then Tuesday is still alive. She's in her 80s. And so we see her again and kind of we learn what her life has been like since 1932, and then it kind of progresses to now, 1987. And the things that she's gone through and the perspective that she has on life. Yeah, I loved the character of Tuesday. And then we're watching a possible romance happen between Harlow and Matt, and it was so sweet. It was so sweet. Now, neither character is perfect. I mean, no characters ever are perfect. And there were some really funny moments in this book. Especially kind of when Matt and Harlow kind of reconnect, because they had met previously due to their profession. And so when they kind of meet in town, such a funny scene. Such a funny scene. So this is classified as a women's fiction, but it is set, it's like contemporary, but it's contemporary being 1987. So not like nowadays contemporary. But I don't want to say historical fiction. So yeah, I really enjoyed this story. There is one part near the end that I just struggled with. I don't want to say what it is because I don't want to give things away, but it's like somebody appearing to you that is not really there. And I did not like that story aspect. But in regards to the roller rink, I thought I knew what was going to happen. And I was really rooting for what I thought was going to happen. And then it takes a turn. It was like, wait, what? And it was like, okay, well, can this happen then? And so I was fully invested in the story. But it was really the characters that did the story for me. It was really the characters. Yes. So I gave this book 4 stars, and I would highly recommend giving it a try. And it is a gorgeous cover. Okay, then I've got Brunch at Bittersweet Café by Carla Laureano. This is book 2 of the Supper Club series. In this one, we are following Melody, who is the baker, the pastry chef that we met in book 1. So this series follows 3 best friends and kind of we're following romances and moving forward for the future. And not just in a romance perspective, but also kind of where's their life going to take them. And so Melody meets the guy in a very kind of what could be a frightening situation. And it was like, okay, is this a one-time meet? But then other things happen, and so it's not a one-time meet. And I loved watching this relationship kind of bloom and the questions, because it seems like life is taking them in 2 different directions. Can they figure out a way to come together and kind of explore their feelings, or do they go in those 2 separate directions? And then at one point it was like, it does not look positive for them at all. And I'm like, Now, this was a reread for me, so I did know what was going to happen, but I still really enjoyed these characters and getting to know them. There is one part of it where I was really annoyed at one of the best friends. I just didn't like the way she was treating Melody. But Melody stands up for herself and kind of learns, and then there's a few times that Melody stands up for herself, and I really enjoyed that. And now that I've read this one, I can finally read book 3, which is on my July TBR, and which is not a reread for me. So now I've refreshed myself with these characters. I can finally read that one and complete the series. So I give this book 4 stars. It is a very sweet and fun contemporary romance set in Denver, Colorado. Oh, and in a bakery, if you can't guess. So if you like food and talking about food, there's a lot of food mentioned in this book. Okay, now we've got... 4 books left. So I've got 3 5 stars left and 1 novella, but I can't talk about that until I talk about the book it goes with. Okay, so Positively Penelope by Pepper Basham. This is book 2 of the Skymar series, and I loved this book. I loved Penelope and her outlook on life, and so the title is so true. She's so positive and always finds the sunshine side of things. And there is a possible romance with one of 2 brothers. Which brother is she going to go for? Which one does she connect with? And then there are emails and text messages back to her brother, her sisters, and her cousin, Izzy, who we met in book 1. And then Luke is the brother, who's book number 3, which is on my July TBR. And so, yeah, I enjoyed this book so much. So Penelope is away from home doing an internship at a theater. So there's a lot of musical and theater kind of references, especially Julie Andrews, who I just adore and know a lot of her movies. So that was really fun for me. So I really connected with Penelope in ways. And then the romance. This was just such a fun, heartwarming read. I highly recommend it. And don't let the emails and text messages throw you off, because there are yes, it is a lot of the book, but there is a lot of the book that is also kind of in real time. We're following is told the way a book is normally told. And so I really enjoyed it. This is definitely one of my favorite books of the year. Okay, so then I read Where the Road Bends by Rachel Fordham. And this is set in the late 1800s in Iowa. We meet Nora, who has inherited the farm from her father when he passed away, but she is struggling to keep the farm and the bank is threatening to take it away. So she agrees to marry a man and for a marriage of convenience, just so she can keep the farm. Before the wedding actually happens, she finds this guy injured and brings him back to her place to help him heal, and the guy is Quincy. And over the days that they're together, they kind of get to know each other, and feelings kind of develop, but there's this promise. And if she keeps Quincy at her place, that could jeopardize everything, like, for her future. So Quincy leaves. And then something happened. You turn the page and it says something, and I was like, what? Like, it just made me visibly react, because I did not expect it at all. Because it's very early in the book. And I was like, well, now what? And then we are following Quincy from Quincy's point of view than Nora's. And I was fully invested. I needed to know what happened with these two characters. Like, it was just like, wow. And Quincy is keeping a secret from Nora, which could really come back and haunt him. And so it's like, okay, Quincy, I understand why you're keeping this, but I am also like, please tell her, because she will deal with it, and not the way you expect her to deal with it. I'm positive of it. Yeah. So, but we're also got kind of a found family aspect happening, and a group of characters who have just become friends and made their own family. And I loved following that group. And each character was very individual, and it was easy to distinguish character between character. I loved watching this relationship bloom, and kind of what's going to happen. What happens with the marriage of convenience, and do you get to choose to fall in love, or do you marry and then fall in love? Like, what was going to happen? I highly recommend this story. There is not as much faith talk in this as I expected from previous books that I've read by Rachel, but it is still there, just not as high. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. Okay, and the last 5-star read is More Than Words Can Say by Karen Witemeyer. This is book 2 of the Patchwork Family series. Now, I would recommend reading this series in order, because in book 1, you meet Zach and you get to know kind of more of his background than you do in this book. But this was a reread for me, so I have read book 1 before, and so I just really wanted to read this one, because this is a marriage to convenience story, and I loved it the first time I read it, and I loved it again this time. So we are following Abigail, who owns a bakery she's inherited from her father, and this is set in Texas in the late 1800s, 1896. And Abigail is told by the city council that women are not allowed to own property in this town. So either she needs to find a man to take title of the property, or has to close her business. And Abigail's like, what? So she goes through her different scenarios and plans, and what can she do? Finally, she decides, okay, I'm going to do a marriage of convenience. I'm going to marry somebody just to get their name on the deed, and I can keep my bakery, but it will just be a business relationship, and that's it. So she has some men that she is going to approach, and Zach is one of those men. And she also has a sister who is a few years younger than her, so she's kind of taking care of her. I think, what is her name now? Rosalind is 17 when this book starts, so just a couple years younger. And so we watch Abigail and Zach, and neither one want to be in a marriage, in a relationship. Zach has bachelor life. He is done raising siblings, and now he's on his own. He doesn't want to be committed to anybody and do what he wants. But then he hears about Abigail's plight, and kind of he's always been a little bit attracted to her, and it's like, okay, I'll help her out in this way, and it won't be a hardship for me, because she has this plan that is just a business arrangement. And well, things develop. And I just love watching the relationship develop between the two because they didn't plan it and they really had to work for it. But there is also another lady in town who used to be best friends with Abigail, who is no longer her best friend. And so we know that something happened to break up the friendship, but we don't know what it is. And she is mean to Abigail. And really and then as the story progresses, as things are revealed, we find out what she has against Abigail. And the way Abigail stands up for herself and doesn't take what this lady is doing to her or doesn't react negatively to it, doesn't, get back at her kind of thing. I really loved Abigail. The strength of character that she had. And then the way that Zach protected Abigail and Rosie and kind of really just took him under his wing right away, and then feelings start to develop. Now, this is a marriage to convenience story, and there are physical interactions talked about, and so it can be, I wouldn't recommend a teenager to read this because it is talking about marriage life in some ways, and will they become husband and wife in true words, right? And so, but I love these characters, and this was just such a fun story that just put a smile on my face as I was reading it. And I just enjoyed it as much as I did the first time around. And I am a sucker for marriage of conveniences who think, no, we're going to keep it platonic, just as friends, and then love develops. And watching them kind of fight that love or kind of risk their relationship for that love to see if that could work. I love that. So that was my last 5-star read. But the last book that I have to talk about is More Than a Pretty Face by Karen Witemeyer. This is a novella, 2.5 of the Patchwork Family. And this one is following Rosie's story. Now, I had never read Rosie's story before when I read this one. So when I found it on Libby, I was like, yeah, please, I want to. So I read that one. Now, it is a novella. So in my world, it is too short. I needed more. So we know from this one that Rosie is dealing with a secret and something that can kind of come back and haunt her, and Zach is trying to protect her. And so at the end of this one, she has left town, kind of escaping from this coming to find her. So in the More Than a Pretty Face, she is in this new community, and what happens when her secret comes to life there. And so she meets this guy, Caleb, and his mother is very against anything happening between Caleb and Rosie. But Caleb really wants a relationship with Rosie. And so we see kind of Caleb ask Rosie out, and things kind of start to develop. But then all of a sudden it jumps a number of weeks, I think, and now Rosie and Caleb are spending a lot of time together, and a relationship is developing. And I was like, well, I wanted to see this to this. That's the problem with novellas. You miss a lot. And then the secret's revealed, and the way that Caleb stood up for Rosie, especially stood up to his mother, that's the kind of guy. That is a good guy. And then he makes his mother decide, what are you going to do? How do you want to be in my life or not? And the way that his mother kind of sees how she was responding, probably not well, and she kind of turns around, and I really enjoyed it. And it was so nice to see a conclusion to Rosie's story from a situation in her past, which she was very ashamed of, and she really had been taken advantage of and put in this, and she is now kind of accepted it and is no, that's in the past. I'm not going to let that define my future anymore. And I really enjoyed it. So I gave it 4 stars. It would have been a 5 stars, I'm sure, if it was a longer book. It was just too short. I would have loved to spend more time with these characters. But the great thing about it is because it picks up 3-4 years after More Than Words Can Say, we kind of get a little insight of where these two characters are now. I really enjoyed that because I really like these characters. So, as I said, these are my 3 5-stars for the month. And yeah, I had an awesome reading month because, yes, I had a few 3 stars, but majority of them were 4 or 5. And these 3 for sure, I would definitely reread again because they put a smile on my face and I just really enjoyed them. And those are the type of books that I would love to reread. So what is your favorite read from the month of June? Please tell me in the comments below, and maybe if I haven't read it, I'll add it to my TBR for the future. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video today, and I hope I've given you some recommendations to try and interested you in some books that maybe you didn't know about. I'd love it if you would like and subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for future videos. Thank you. Bye.